When we look around in today's world, we see people moving fast, always running, always chasing, but often at the cost of their own well-being. Burnout is becoming an epidemic. People are exhausted, drained, and silently struggling while still showing up with a smile on their face. And in such times, what most people need is not advice, not quick fixes, not another checklist of productivity hacks, but rather someone who can simply be there with them. Presence and compassion are often more healing than solutions. The invitation here is simple: slow down, open your heart, and be grounded enough to truly see the human being in front of you. The first key is to understand that silence can sometimes be more powerful than words. We live in a world addicted to noise, a world where every moment seems to demand commentary, analysis, or advice. When someone tells us they are tired, we respond with suggestions. When they confess they are struggling, we rush to offer solutions. We often forget that when a person is burned out, their mind is already drowning in words. Inner words of self-criticism, outer words of demands, unending lists of things to do. Their nervous system is overloaded, their thoughts tangled, their spirit stretched thin. And in that moment, the last thing they need is another layer of noise. What they need is a sacred pause. They need silence. Silence in the presence of another human being is not emptiness, it is presence in its purest form. Imagine sitting with someone whose whole body is weary. They don't have the strength to explain, to argue, or to defend why they feel the way they do. They just need to exhale. And when you choose silence, when you hold that space without rushing to fill it, you create something rare in today's world, a sanctuary. That sanctuary tells them, without words, I see you. I'm here. You don't have to perform for me. You don't have to justify your exhaustion. You don't have to make sense. You can just be. Think of silence as soil. Words are like seeds, but seeds cannot grow without soil. When someone is burned out, they don't need more seeds thrown at them. They need rich, fertile silence where the seeds of their own healing can take root. They need stillness where their spirit can finally rest, even for a few moments, from the constant bombardment of expectations. When you sit with them quietly, you allow them to hear something they haven't heard in a long time, their own breath. And sometimes, just the sound of their breath, unjudged and unhurried, can remind them that life is still moving through them, that they are still alive, still here, still capable of healing. We often underestimate how healing simple listening can be. Not listening to respond, not listening to interrupt, not listening so you can share your story, but listening like it is the most important thing in the world. This kind of listening requires silence. It requires you to resist the urge to fix the moment. It requires you to surrender the ego that wants to say, here's what you should do, and instead sit humbly in the discomfort of not having an answer. That humility is a gift. Because what burnt-out people crave is not a solution, but understanding. They crave a place where they are not a problem to solve but a person to embrace. If you've ever been in a moment of deep exhaustion, you know how sharp words can feel. Even well-intentioned advice can land like pressure. Try meditating. Have you considered exercise? Maybe you should sleep more. Though these suggestions are logical, they often feel like accusations to the burnt-out mind, like yet another demand they are failing to meet. But when someone chooses silence instead of piling on more words, that silence feels like acceptance. It feels like a soft blanket laid over a restless heart. It feels like a gentle hand resting on the weight of your chaos, saying without saying, you don't have to change for me. You don't have to do anything right now. Just exist. Silence can also allow emotions to surface that words would otherwise suppress. When you give someone space without pressure, tears may come. Their breathing may slow. They may whisper something they haven't been able to admit to anyone else. That is the power of silence. It creates room for truth to emerge. And sometimes, truth spoken in a whisper, after long moments of shared quiet, carries more healing than 1,000 motivational speeches. There is also something deeply grounding about choosing silence in a noisy world. We have been trained to fill every gap, every pause, with chatter. But when you resist that reflex and instead lean into stillness, you model a different way of being. You show the person before you that silence is not awkward, it is sacred. That being with someone without speaking is not a lack of connection, but one of the deepest forms of it. For the burnt-out heart, that lesson is revolutionary. They learn that rest is not laziness, that pausing is not failure, and that stillness is not emptiness, it is restoration. And perhaps the greatest gift of silence is that it creates safety. Safety not in the sense of protection from harm, but safety from judgment. In silence, no one is correcting you, no one is telling you to hurry, no one is demanding you be more than you are. It is a moment of reprieve, a moment where your spirit can catch up with your body. That kind of safety is rare. And when someone gives it to you through their silent presence, it becomes unforgettable. The second key is to recognize the power of presence. Presence is one of the rarest and most precious gifts you can offer someone who is burned out, and yet it costs nothing. We often underestimate how deeply transformative it is to be truly seen, to have another human being give you their full and undivided attention. In a culture that glorifies multitasking, distraction, and busyness, presence has become a lost art. Most of us listen with only half of ourselves. Our minds wander, our eyes drift to screens, and our bodies are there, but our souls are elsewhere. But presence, true presence, is the opposite. Presence is when you choose to be nowhere else but here, with this person, in this exact moment. Imagine a friend comes to you weary and worn out. They are speaking, but their words are scattered. Their sentences don't always make sense because their mind is fragmented. If you meet them with distraction, checking your phone, glancing at the clock, waiting to reply, you confirm what they already fear, that they don't matter, that they are invisible. But if you lean in, if you set everything else aside and look into their eyes with genuine attention, if you nod and listen not just with your ears but with your entire being, you communicate something so much larger than words. You are saying, right now, nothing is more important than you. I am here. And that simple message has the power to begin mending the fractures of burnout. Presence is not about having the right answers or perfect advice. It is about offering your full humanity. Burnout often isolates people, convincing them that no one understands and no one cares. Presence breaks through that isolation without even speaking a single sentence of wisdom. It dissolves loneliness. It reassures. It whispers, you don't have to walk this road by yourself. To understand the power of presence, think of a time when you were in pain, physical, emotional, or spiritual. Maybe nothing anyone could say would take the pain away. Yet what mattered most was not words but whether someone was there with you. Perhaps they held your hand in silence. Perhaps they sat beside you when you cried. Their presence didn't change your circumstance, but it changed you. It reminded you that you were not abandoned, not forgotten, not invisible. That is the essence of presence. It may not fix the problem, but it touches the heart. And when the heart feels supported, the weight of the burden becomes lighter. Presence is also deeply grounding. Burnout scatters the mind, pulling a person in 1,000 directions. They feel fragmented, disoriented, unmoored. But when someone else brings presence into the room, it acts like gravity. It pulls the scattered pieces back down to earth. You can almost feel the shift when a person is truly present with you. Their energy is steady, their gaze is soft, their breathing calm. Just being in their company slows your own breathing, quiets your thoughts, and reminds you that stillness is possible. Presence is contagious in that way. One grounded soul can bring peace to another. But presence is not only about physical nearness. It is also about emotional and spiritual availability. You can sit beside someone but still not be present if your mind is elsewhere. True presence requires intention. It requires you to empty your hands, quiet your thoughts, and give yourself over fully to the moment. It requires humility because to be present is to say, this moment is not about me. It is about you. That humility is love in action. There's a story of a child who ran to her father every evening after he came home from work. She would climb into his lap and just sit there. Sometimes she would talk, sometimes she would be silent. One evening, the father asked her, "Why do you always sit with me without saying anything?" And the little girl answered, "Because when I sit with you, I know you're really here." That is presence. Not the kind that demands words but the kind that says, my whole self is with you. That kind of presence can heal wounds that words never reach. For those who are burned out, presence feels like oxygen. They have been living in a world that demands their attention constantly, yet rarely gives them back undivided attention in return. They pour themselves out at work, at home, in their relationships, but no one pours back into them with the same fullness. When someone comes along and offers true presence, it feels like finally being allowed to inhale after holding your breath for too long. Feels like relief. Presence also builds trust. A burned out person may feel fragile, guarded, or skeptical. They may not open up immediately. But if you keep showing up with consistent presence, not forced, not hurried, not judgmental, they slowly learn that you are safe. They begin to risk sharing a little more of themselves. And each time you remain present, you affirm that trust. Over time, that trust becomes a foundation for their healing. And the most beautiful part is this. Presence is not only healing for the one who receives it, but also for the one who gives it. In learning to be present for someone else, you also reclaim presence for yourself. You slow down. You soften. You realize that life is richer when you are fully in the moment instead of racing to the next task. By offering presence, you are transformed too. Presence heals both the giver and the receiver. The third key is compassion over correction. Too often when we see someone suffering from burnout, our first instinct is to correct them, to point out what they're doing wrong, or to offer advice about how they can fix themselves. It comes from a good place. Most of us want to help. But burnout is not a math equation that needs solving. It is not a broken appliance that needs repairing. Burnout is an experience, a human struggle, a cry from the body and the soul saying, I cannot keep carrying this weight. And when someone is in that place, correction often lands like criticism. Even when our intentions are pure, correction can sound like, you're not doing enough, or you should have prevented this, or here's another thing you're failing at. The last thing a weary heart needs is another reminder that they are somehow not enough. What they need desperately is compassion. Compassion is very different from correction. Correction wants to fix, but compassion wants to embrace. Correction says, here's what you should do. Compassion says, I see how hard this has been for you. Correction often keeps a distance. It positions itself as superior, as if the one offering it has the answers and the other is the problem. Compassion, however, comes alongside. It sits with the person, not above them. It doesn't judge, it doesn't demand, it doesn't rush. Compassion whispers, you don't have to prove anything right now. You don't have to get better for me to stay. I'll walk with you in this. Think about the difference between hearing these two responses when you tell someone you're exhausted. One person says, well, maybe if you organized your time better you wouldn't feel this way. Another person says, that sounds so heavy. I can imagine how drained you must feel. I'm here for you. Which one brings relief? Which one makes you feel less alone? That is the power of compassion over correction. Compassion also acknowledges the reality of burnout rather than trying to bypass it. Correction wants to hurry people past their pain, to push them into solutions. Compassion, however, is willing to sit in the mess with them. It says, you don't have to be on the other side of this before I'll show up for you. I'll sit with you in the middle of it. That willingness to be with someone in their suffering is often more healing than any advice you could give. Because people don't remember formulas, they remember how you made them feel. They remember whether they felt judged or embraced. There's a story told about a man who fell into a deep hole. He called out for help and people passed by, giving advice from the edge. Climb harder. You should have been more careful. Here's a book on how to avoid holes next time. But none of those voices actually helped him out. Then a friend came along, saw him in the hole, and climbed down to sit beside him. The man in the hole cried, why did you come down here? Now you're stuck too. But the friend replied, I've been down here before. I know the way out. But first, I'm going to sit with you so you don't have to be alone. That is compassion. It doesn't shout from the sidelines. It steps into the struggle and offers presence before solutions. Burnout makes people feel like failures even when they are not. It convinces them that they are weak, that they've done something wrong, that they are somehow less worthy because they can't keep going like everyone else seems to. Correction reinforces those lies. Compassion dismantles them. Compassion says, you're not broken for feeling this way. You're human. And being human is enough. Compassion reframes burnout not as a flaw, but as a signal that a human being has carried too much for too long. That shift in perspective is often the beginning of healing. It's important to remember that compassion doesn't mean doing nothing. It doesn't mean ignoring the reality of burnout. It means the starting point is love, not judgment. Once someone feels seen and safe, once they know they are not being criticized, they are far more likely to open themselves to change and growth. Compassion builds the bridge that correction alone cannot. Without compassion, advice feels heavy. With compassion, even gentle guidance can feel like support instead of pressure. When you meet someone's burnout with compassion, you also reflect back their dignity. You remind them that they are not just a machine for producing results. They are a person with limits, with needs, with a heart that deserves care. Compassion treats them not as a project, but as a soul. And that recognition alone can soften the hardest exhaustion. If we want to truly help those facing burnout, including ourselves, we must learn to lead with compassion first. Because in the end, people don't need to be corrected into healing. They need to be loved into healing. They need someone to look at their exhaustion not with frustration, but with tenderness. They need someone to stop saying, you should, and instead say, I understand, and I'm here. That shift is everything. The fourth key is groundedness. When someone is going through burnout, their world feels shaky. Their body is tired, their mind is racing, their emotions are fragile. They feel like they are standing in the middle of a storm with no shelter, no anchor, nothing to hold on to. In those moments, the greatest gift you can offer them is not to climb into the storm with them, but to stand firmly in your own calm, steady presence. Groundedness means becoming the steady ground beneath their trembling feet. It means you don't get swept up in their panic or pulled into their exhaustion. You remain rooted, centered, and unshaken, so they can borrow from your steadiness until they find their own again. Think of a tree in heavy winds. The branches may whip and sway, but the trunk remains firm because its roots go deep. Now imagine someone who is burned out. They are the branches, tossed around by pressures, demands, and endless responsibilities. If you rush into their storm with your own frantic energy, you become just another branch swaying wildly. But if you stay grounded, if you show up like the rooted trunk of a tree, your presence reminds them that it is possible to be still, even when the winds blow. And sometimes, just knowing that stillness exists is enough to give them hope. Groundedness does not mean indifference. It doesn't mean standing cold and detached, pretending you don't care. It means staying calm while still being connected. It means listening with your heart without letting fear or overwhelm take over. Because burnout is contagious. If one person's panic meets another person's panic, it creates chaos. But if one person's panic meets another person's calm, it creates balance. You can become the counterweight to their heaviness, the quiet to their noise, the ground to their storm. Groundedness is also about energy. Every person carries an invisible energy into a room. Some people bring tension, others bring chaos, and some bring peace. When you are grounded, your energy speaks louder than your words. The burnt-out person may not remember everything you said, but they will remember how your presence made them feel. If you bring groundedness, they will feel safer. They will breathe easier. Their nervous system will begin to calm simply by being near yours. Imagine someone who is drowning in exhaustion. Their arms are flailing, their breath is short, they feel like they are sinking. If you panic and jump in flailing too, you both drown. But if you are grounded, if you enter the water calm and strong, you can hold them up until they can catch their breath. That is the essence of groundedness. It doesn't ignore the storm, but it refuses to be consumed by it. Instead, it offers a steady place for another soul to rest. Groundedness also means knowing yourself well enough to stay steady. You cannot be grounded for someone else if you are not grounded within yourself. That requires practices that root you: breathing, reflection, stillness, prayer, meditation, time in nature, whatever helps you return to center. Because when you are rooted deeply within, you can withstand the winds of other people's chaos without toppling over. You can be present with their pain without losing your own balance. In this way, groundedness is both a gift to yourself and a gift to those around you. There's a story of a wise elder who once sat with a younger man overwhelmed by life. The young man paced back and forth, talking fast, his hands shaking as he poured out his worries. The elder did not interrupt, did not panic, did not rush to give answers. He simply sat still, breathing slowly, looking gently at the young man. Eventually, the young man slowed down. His voice softened. His pacing stopped. Finally, he sat down across from the elder and whispered, "Why do I feel calmer just being here with you?" The elder smiled and said, "Because my stillness reminded your spirit how to be still." That is the quiet power of groundedness. Groundedness is not dramatic. It does not shout, it does not demand attention. It works quietly, almost invisibly. But for the burnt-out heart, it can be life-saving. When someone is collapsing under the weight of their world, they need to know that someone else's world is still steady. They need to feel that stability, to sense that not everything is chaos. Your groundedness becomes their proof that calm is possible, that rest exists, that there is a way back to balance. In the end, burnout is not simply about exhaustion, it is about disconnection. Disconnection from rest, from joy, from self, and from others. The 7 keys we've explored are not complicated practices, they are deeply human ones. Silence, presence, compassion, groundedness, patience, small acts of kindness, and reminders of someone's inner light. These are not strategies from a textbook. They are acts of the heart. They are reminders of what it means to be human together. We don't always need to heal people with answers. Sometimes, we heal them by showing up. By being quiet when silence is needed. By holding space when the world feels too heavy. By choosing compassion instead of correction. By being steady when everything else is falling apart. By being patient with a process that cannot be rushed. By offering the smallest gestures of kindness that whisper, "I see you." By reflecting back to someone their own beauty, their own strength, their own light, even when they cannot see it themselves. If each of us could bring more of this into our homes, our friendships, our workplaces, and our communities, we could begin to change the way the world meets exhaustion. We could create spaces where people don't feel they must wear masks of strength while crumbling inside. We could remind one another that being human is not about endless doing, but about being, resting, connecting, and caring. So when you encounter someone who is burned out, or when you yourself feel the weight of burnout pressing in, remember this simple truth: you don't always have to fix, to rush, or to force. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be there. And in that simple act, you may give someone the courage to keep going, the permission to rest, and the strength to begin again.